The chandeliers of the Crystal Heights ballroom sparkled like frozen stars, casting golden light across marble floors and velvet-draped tables. It was the night of the Bright Horizons Gala, the most prestigious charity event of the year, where business titans, celebrities, and politicians mingled under one roof. Cameras flashed, waiters carried trays of champagne, and a string quartet played softly near the stage. At the center of the spectacle stood Andrew Weston, 32, a man who relished the spotlight. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his hair slicked back with practiced precision. But what drew every gaze was the woman on his arm, Ela Monroe, a 23-year-old model with legs that seemed to stretch forever and a smile as polished as the diamonds on her wrist. Andrew had never looked more triumphant. He paraded Ela across the ballroom as if she were a prize he had won, shaking hands with old colleagues, whispering boasts into the ears of investors. "Meet my fiancée," he said repeatedly, savoring the collective gasp each time. The gossip spread like wildfire. Andrew has moved on. And look who he chose. People whispered behind champagne glasses. Some envied, others pitied. Everyone remembered Emma, the woman Andrew had divorced only months ago, the woman now carrying his child. She had vanished quietly, no longer seen at board meetings or society luncheons. Rumor had it she was struggling to make ends meet, barely surviving. To many in that glittering room, tonight felt like Andrew's victory lap. Ela leaned into him, her crimson gown clinging to her figure. She laughed loudly at his jokes, letting her manicured hand rest possessively on his chest. "You've outdone yourself," one investor muttered to Andrew. "Trading up was the smartest move you've made." Andrew only smirked, basking in the validation. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, drawing attention to the stage. Andrew tightened his grip on Ela's hand, preparing to deliver his big announcement about his company's expansion. He wanted this moment to cement his place among the elite, the ambitious CEO with a glamorous bride-to-be. But just as he stepped toward the spotlight, the heavy double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. The music faltered. Conversations froze. Heads turned. There, framed by the gilded doorway, stood Emma Weston. She was radiant, though her dress was simple, a flowing navy gown that could not hide the swell of her pregnant belly. Her hair, loose and shining under the chandelier light, gave her an aura of quiet dignity. She wasn't the broken woman people expected. She wasn't hiding anymore. And she wasn't alone. Beside her walked Victor Hale, the elusive billionaire jet owner whose face rarely appeared in public. He was tall, commanding, with silver at his temples and eyes that radiated power. Everyone in that room knew his name. His fleet of private jets ferried presidents, royalty, and global icons. To see him here, at Emma's side, was nothing short of shocking. A hush swept across the gala like a storm wind. Champagne glasses trembled in midair. The string quartet stopped altogether. Even the chandeliers seemed to flicker with tension. Andrew's smile collapsed. His hand slipped from Ela's arm. His eyes locked on Emma, disbelief flashing across his face. He had mocked her as weak, discarded her as useless. Yet here she was, more formidable than ever, and accompanied by a man who could buy and sell his entire company without blinking. Ela stiffened, her fingers tightening around her clutch. She sensed it too, the shift in the room, the crumbling of the pedestal she thought she stood on. Every camera swiveled. Every whisper turned into a roar. And in that electrifying moment, everyone knew. This night was not Andrew Weston's triumph. It was the beginning of his downfall. Before the gasps of the gala and the shock of her entrance, Emma Weston had lived a life that felt like a faded photograph. Once full of color, now drained by betrayal. She was 28, born and raised in a modest neighborhood in Queens. Her father had been a bus driver, her mother a schoolteacher. They didn't have wealth, but they gave Emma something more valuable: resilience. She carried that resilience with her when she met Andrew Weston in college. He was charming, ambitious, with a smile that could disarm anyone. Back then, he wasn't the arrogant CEO flaunting his success. He was just a young man with dreams, the kind Emma believed in. When they married, Emma gave everything she had. She left her job as an executive assistant to support Andrew's career, managing the household, entertaining his colleagues, and making sure he had the stability he claimed he needed to build his empire. She believed in him so completely that she ignored the small cracks, his late nights, his condescending remarks, the way he started treating her as a shadow rather than a partner. And then came the pregnancy. For Emma, it was a blessing. She dreamed of the tiny kicks, the lullabies, the life she would nurture. She believed the baby would bring them closer, heal the growing distance. But for Andrew, it was a burden. His empire was rising, and he saw fatherhood as an anchor dragging him down. The night he left was etched into her memory like a scar. It was raining, a relentless storm hammering against the windows. She was 6 months pregnant, swollen ankles and an aching back, when Andrew came home with cold eyes. He didn't shout, he didn't cry. He simply said, "I can't do this anymore. You're holding me back." Emma remembered standing in the doorway, clutching her belly, as he walked out with a suitcase. No kiss, no goodbye. Just silence. In the days that followed, the whispers began. Friends she thought were loyal stopped calling. Women at the prenatal clinic gave her pitying looks. His company released a statement about irreconcilable differences, and society quickly painted Emma as the disposable wife who couldn't keep up with her husband's success. Money became tight. Andrew had forced her out of their shared accounts, leaving her with a small apartment and the faint hope that she could rebuild. She clipped coupons, skipped meals to save money for prenatal vitamins, and walked to her doctor's appointments because she couldn't afford cab fare. Each night, she lay awake, whispering to her unborn child, "I'll protect you. I don't know how, but I will." What Andrew never realized was that Emma's strength was forged in silence. Every tear she shed, every humiliation she endured, was not weakness, it was fuel. The image of her sitting on a second-hand couch, staring at eviction notices, one hand on her belly and the other wiping away tears, was enough to break the hardest heart. Yet inside her, something fierce grew alongside the baby, the will to survive. And survival, as fate would prove, would lead her into the path of Victor Hale. But that was later. For now, Emma was still the wounded wife, the expectant mother society had written off. The world saw a broken woman, but those who looked closer, those who truly listened, could see the fire flickering in her eyes. A fire waiting for the right moment to blaze. Andrew Weston had always been ambitious. Even as a college student, he was the one who lingered after lectures, hungry not just for knowledge but for connections. He wasn't content with a degree. He wanted power, wealth, and influence. At first, this drive was admirable. Professors praised his determination. Classmates envied his confidence. Emma, back then a shy but compassionate young woman, believed his ambition was a flame that would light both their futures. When they married, Andrew started small, working as a junior analyst at a mid-level firm. The hours were brutal, the pay unimpressive, but he never came home defeated. Instead, he came home plotting. Over late-night takeout at their tiny apartment, he would tell Emma about the companies he would build, the empire he would command. She listened, smiled, and encouraged him, never realizing that the empire he dreamed of had no room for her once it became real. Andrew's break came when he manipulated a struggling software company into selling cheap. While others saw a dying venture, Andrew saw opportunity. He rebranded, restructured, and marketed it as a revolutionary platform. Investors swarmed, and overnight, Andrew transformed from an overlooked analyst into a rising star. Wealth followed quickly. They moved into a penthouse. He bought designer suits, luxury cars, and treated Emma to extravagant dinners. At least in the beginning. But soon the attention, the spotlight, became intoxicating. Andrew no longer introduced Emma as his partner. She was his wife in the most casual sense, a decorative accessory. Business dinners turned into networking parties where Emma felt invisible. And then came the comments. "You should try harder to look the part," he told her once, glancing at her modest dress while his colleagues' wives shimmered in couture. "Don't embarrass me," he whispered during another gala when her heels made her stumble. The pregnancy was the final wedge. To Emma, it was joy. To Andrew, it was an inconvenience. He was in the middle of expansion talks, negotiating with venture capitalists, and the idea of fatherhood felt like a chain around his ankle. He told colleagues in private that he couldn't be babysitting when there were billions to chase. Behind Emma's back, he began cultivating a new image, a younger, flashier image. That's when Ela Monroe entered the picture. She was everything Emma wasn't, at least in Andrew's warped perspective. A model, glamorous and hungry for fame, she fit neatly into the world Andrew was desperate to impress. Hila didn't question his long hours or his endless boasting. She laughed at his jokes, clung to his arm, and made him feel invincible. The affair started discreetly, lavish gifts, late-night rendezvous under the guise of business meetings. But Andrew's arrogance grew. He no longer feared scandal. He believed himself untouchable. To him, Emma was already obsolete, a woman at home with swollen ankles and grocery coupons, while he dazzled society with a glittering fiancée. One evening, Emma confronted him after finding Hila's perfume on his jacket. He didn't deny it. Instead, he smirked and said, "You were good for when I was nothing, but I'm not nothing anymore." That sentence became the knife that severed their marriage. Andrew justified everything in the name of ambition. To him, betrayal wasn't betrayal, it was evolution. He discarded Emma like an outdated investment and paraded Hila as proof of his upgrade. What he never understood was that ambition without loyalty is a poison, and that poison was already seeping into the empire he thought was indestructible. Hila Monroe had grown up in the kind of world where beauty was currency and ambition was survival. Born in Miami to a struggling single mother, she learned early that charm could open doors money couldn't. By 16, she was walking runways at local fashion shows. By 18, she had moved to New York, determined to claw her way into the glossy magazines she pored over as a child. The modeling world was brutal. For every glamorous photo shoot, there were 10 humiliations: being dismissed for not being exotic enough, being told to lose more weight, being treated as disposable. Hila didn't just survive it, she weaponized it. She built a persona of untouchable glamour, training herself to laugh when men in power made empty promises, to flirt when investors looked her way, and to cry only when it benefited her. So when she met Andrew Weston at a high-profile launch party, she recognized him instantly, not for who he was, but for what he could be for her. Andrew wasn't the richest man in the room, nor the most handsome, but his hunger was obvious, his need to prove himself practically oozing from every gesture. Hila smelled opportunity. She approached with calculated charm, brushing against his arm, accidentally, complimenting his tie, pretending she hadn't heard of his company, when in fact she had researched him the night before. Andrew was smitten within an hour. To him, Hila represented validation. To her, Andrew was a ladder. From the beginning, Hila knew about Emma. She knew Andrew had a pregnant wife at home. It didn't matter. If anything, it thrilled her. Taking another woman's husband was, in Hila's mind, a victory, a public declaration of her superiority. "Why settle for being someone's girlfriend," she once told a fellow model, "when you can be the reason another woman cries?" Her arrogance grew with Andrew's attention. The more he showered her with gifts, designer gowns, diamond bracelets, first-class vacations, the bolder she became. She flaunted their relationship on social media with cryptic captions, posting pictures of champagne glasses clinking across candle-lit tables, careful never to show Andrew's face, but revealing just enough for gossip to ignite. Behind closed doors, Hila was shrewd. She pushed Andrew to distance himself further from Emma, mocking him whenever he hesitated. "Do you want to be a powerful man or a family man?" she taunted. "Because you can't be both." Her words fed his ego while poisoning his conscience. At galas and charity events, Hila played her role flawlessly. She draped herself across Andrew's arm, her laughter high and effortless, her smile practiced to perfection. But behind the eyeshadow and diamonds lay a calculating mind. Hila wasn't in love with Andrew. She was in love with the world Andrew could deliver. Front row seats at Fashion Week, interviews in Vogue, contracts with luxury brands who valued the Weston name. Her cruelty toward Emma was subtle at first, a raised eyebrow, a dismissive glance when Emma's name came up in conversation. But as Andrew grew bolder in flaunting her, Hila sharpened her claws. She whispered to mutual acquaintances, "Poor Emma, some women just aren't built for men like Andrew." The poison spread quickly through society circles, isolating Emma even further. What Hila didn't know, what her arrogance blinded her to, was that she was building her pedestal on sand. Andrew's empire wasn't as unshakable as she believed. His arrogance, combined with her hunger for status, would draw attention neither of them wanted. And when the tide turned, Hila would discover that society is quick to worship beauty, but even quicker to devour it when the shine fades. For now, though, Hila stood at Andrew's side like a queen, basking in stolen glory, convinced that Emma was gone for good. The Bright Horizons Gala had always been a stage for wealth and power, but that night it became a theater for scandal. Andrew Weston stood proudly on stage, Hila Monroe clinging to his arm, preparing to announce his company's newest expansion. The room buzzed with admiration and envy. Cameras snapped. Glasses clinked. To Andrew, it felt like a coronation. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying over the hush. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is not just about charity. It's about celebrating vision, courage, and the future. His hand tightened around Hila's waist as if to punctuate the point. I'm proud to share this moment with my fiancée, Hila Monroe. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Whispers erupted. Fiancée? The words sliced through the crowd like a blade. Everyone knew Emma. Everyone knew she was still pregnant. The brazenness left mouths agape, but Andrew basked in the attention. He believed he had just written the final chapter of his past. Then the doors opened. At first, no one moved. The sound of heavy oak swinging wide echoed like a gunshot. Heads turned, the orchestra faltered, and there she was, Emma Weston. Her navy gown shimmered under the chandelier, elegant yet modest. Her hair flowed naturally over her shoulders, her makeup subtle but luminous. She wasn't the broken woman people had pitied. She wasn't hiding anymore. And her rounded belly, unmistakably pregnant, was on full display as she stepped forward with calm poise. The silence was suffocating. Some guests covered their mouths, others whispered furiously. Phones lifted discreetly, recording the moment. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was history unfolding in real time. Andrew's confident smirk collapsed. His grip on Hila faltered. For the first time that evening, he looked uncertain, almost small. Emma? He whispered, though no one could hear him over the rising tide of murmurs. But Emma wasn't alone. Walking beside her was Victor Hale, the billionaire jet owner whose fortune and influence dwarfed Andrew's entire empire. His presence was magnetic. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm authority that needed no introduction, Victor's hand rested gently but protectively on Emma's back. To the crowd, the message was clear. She was not abandoned, not alone. She was shielded by power greater than Andrew could ever dream of. Is that Victor Hale? Someone gasped near the bar. The man who owns Hale Aviation? Another whispered. What's he doing with her? Emma's chin lifted as she crossed the marble floor, every step echoing like a drumbeat. She didn't flinch at the stairs, didn't lower her eyes. For months she had cried behind closed doors, curled up in a cheap apartment, abandoned and humiliated. But tonight, she was reborn. She stopped only a few feet from the stage. The entire room was suspended between breaths. Andrew's face drained of color. Hila shifted uncomfortably, her nails digging into his arm. She had wanted to make Emma invisible. Instead, Emma had just stolen every gaze in the room. Victor leaned slightly toward Emma, his voice low but audible to those nearest. You don't have to say a word, they already see. And it was true. The contrast was devastating. On one side of the stage, Andrew flaunted arrogance and betrayal, holding on to a mistress desperate for relevance. On the other, Emma stood radiant, carrying life within her, supported by a man whose very name commanded respect across continents. The crowd knew instantly who the true winner was. And for Andrew Weston, the nightmare had only just begun. The name Victor Hale carried weight heavier than gold. In financial circles, it was synonymous with aviation dominance. His fleet of luxury jets ferried world leaders, royalty, and Hollywood elites. His company contracts stretched from Washington to Dubai, and his signature alone could shift markets. Yet for all his wealth, Victor rarely appeared in public. He was known for his reclusive nature, the kind of man who let power speak in silence. That night, however, silence wasn't enough. He had chosen to step into the storm with Emma at his side. The moment Victor entered, the gala shifted. It was as though the air itself thickened, as if the chandeliers glowed brighter to mark his arrival. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Even the most seasoned socialites, accustomed to brushing shoulders with billionaires, found themselves straightening their posture when his presence filled the room. Andrew Weston, who had strutted through the ballroom hours earlier as though he owned it, suddenly looked like a child who had stolen his father's suit. His shoulders stiffened, his mouth parted in disbelief. He had spent years climbing, clawing, and scheming to be noticed by men like Victor Hale. And now Victor stood only a few steps away, but not as his peer. No, Victor was standing beside the woman Andrew had discarded. Victor's gaze was calm but sharp, the kind that could slice through pretension. He didn't glare, didn't sneer, he didn't need to. His hand, steady on the small of Emma's back, sent a message more devastating than any insult. She is under my protection. Emma drew strength from it. For months, she had carried the crushing weight of abandonment. Tonight, that weight lifted, not because Victor saved her, but because he stood as proof that she was worthy of being valued. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "She's with him?" one woman muttered. Victor Hale, the jet magnate, a man in a tuxedo, nearly dropped his champagne flute. That's not just money, that's global power. Andrew's jaw tightened. He tried to recover his composure, forcing a laugh that fell flat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice cracking slightly into the microphone, "it seems we've had unexpected guests." But the crowd wasn't listening to him anymore. Their eyes were fixed on Victor. Cameras clicked feverishly, flashes lighting up the ballroom like lightning. Reporters whispered about tomorrow's headlines. Pregnant ex-wife returns with billionaire ally. Yila, still clutching Andrew's arm, leaned in and whispered, "What is she doing with him?" Her smile trembled, the sheen of her confidence cracking. Victor finally spoke. His voice was low, resonant, and carried easily across the hall. "We didn't come to disrupt," he said, every syllable deliberate. "We came to support a cause worth more than vanity." His eyes flicked briefly toward Andrew, just long enough for everyone to understand the sting. It was a masterstroke. He hadn't insulted Andrew outright, but he didn't have to. The contrast was already brutal. Andrew flaunted betrayal and selfishness. Victor embodied dignity and loyalty. Emma stood a little taller beside him, her hand resting protectively over her belly. The sight was almost biblical. A betrayed woman reborn in strength, guarded by a man whose empire outshone her ex-husband's hollow triumphs. And though Andrew tried to continue his speech, his words drowned beneath the weight of the crowd's shifting loyalty. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at her. At them. The king of the night had been dethroned, and his replacement had just walked through the door. Long before the glittering chandeliers of the gala, before the whispers and flashing cameras, Emma's path had crossed with Victor Hale's in a far quieter, lonelier place, an airport terminal. It was a gray afternoon in late autumn. Emma, 6 months pregnant and exhausted, sat slumped on a worn leather bench at LaGuardia Airport. She clutched a folded eviction notice in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. Her eyes were red, her shoulders heavy, her dress stretched tight across her growing belly. She had come to the airport not to fly, but to think. Sometimes, when the walls of her tiny apartment closed in, she came here to watch planes rise into the sky, to remind herself that escape was possible, even if it wasn't for her. That day, escape felt like a cruel joke. Her body ached, her ankles swollen, and tears kept slipping past her lashes, no matter how hard she tried to hold them back. Strangers bustled past, businessmen in suits, families with children, young couples laughing. To them, she was invisible. Just another tired woman, pregnant and alone. Until Victor Hale noticed her. He had been on his way to his private terminal, surrounded by assistants juggling phones and briefcases. To most, he was untouchable, a man encased in steel and wealth. But something about the sight of Emma, small and weary on that bench, caught him. He slowed, something he never did, and watched her for a moment. When Emma bent forward, clutching her belly as a sharp cramp shot through her, Victor acted without hesitation. He dismissed his entourage with a flick of his hand and crossed the terminal. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice deep but unexpectedly gentle. Emma tried to smile, tried to insist she was fine, but her lips trembled and her body betrayed her with another spasm of pain. I just need a minute," she whispered. Victor knelt beside her, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. "You don't look fine," he said firmly. "Let me call someone for you." Pride prickled in Emma's chest. She didn't want help, didn't want pity. But the sincerity in his eyes disarmed her. It wasn't pity, it was concern. Against her instincts, she nodded. He personally drove her to the hospital that afternoon. Not an assistant, not a chauffeur, he. While doctors confirmed she was experiencing stress-induced contractions, Victor waited outside, arms crossed, his jaw tight. When the doctor reassured him the baby was safe but urged Emma to rest and avoid strain, Victor exhaled slowly, relief flickering across his usually stoic face. Afterward, Emma tried to thank him with awkward gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly as he walked her back to the car. Victor looked at her for a long moment. "No one else was going to," he replied simply. In the weeks that followed, he checked in. At first, just brief calls. "Are you eating? Did you make your appointment?" Then visits, dropping off groceries, arranging discreet financial help without insulting her pride. Emma resisted at first, suspicious of his motives. But Victor never asked for anything in return. He didn't pry, didn't judge. He simply showed up. Slowly, Emma began to trust him. He became a quiet constant in her unraveling world, a reminder that not all men abandoned when life grew heavy. So when Victor walked beside her into the gala months later, his hand steady on her back, it wasn't spectacle. It wasn't performance. It was the culmination of a bond forged in silence, in hardship, in moments no camera would ever capture. And though the world saw a billionaire protecting a pregnant ex-wife, Emma knew the truth. He wasn't saving her. He was standing with her, because from the moment they met, he had seen her worth, even when she couldn't. Long before the bright lights of the gala, before Victor's steady hand at her back, Emma lived nights that would have broken most women. Nights where silence screamed louder than thunder, and loneliness gnawed at her like a hunger that never ended. Her apartment was small, one bedroom, peeling paint, the kind of place where the radiator clanked at odd hours. The rent was barely affordable, but it was all she had after Andrew cut her off. The penthouse they once shared, with its panoramic city views, belonged to him now, paraded online with Hila posing in silk robes for photographers. Emma tried not to look, but the images found her anyway, on magazine covers at grocery stores, on news feeds she hadn't even clicked. She cried in silence, not the loud sobs of anger, but the quiet tears of someone too exhausted to fight. She would lie on the second-hand couch, one hand over her swollen belly, whispering to the child growing inside her. "I'm sorry. I'll do better for you. Just hold on a little longer." The eviction notice sat on the kitchen counter for days, an unspoken threat. She skipped meals to stretch what little she had, telling herself she wasn't hungry. But the truth was, she gave up food so she could buy prenatal vitamins. Her baby came first, always. Sometimes when the loneliness was unbearable, she walked to the park at night. She would sit on a bench, watching families pass by, fathers pushing strollers, mothers laughing with toddlers. Each sight was a knife in her chest. Her child would never know that picture-perfect family. Instead, they would grow up with the knowledge that their father had chosen another woman over them before they were even born. Emma's lowest moment came one stormy night. She had spent the afternoon trying to repair a leaky faucet, water pooling across the cracked tiles of her kitchen. Her back ached, her feet were swollen, and the baby kicked restlessly as if sensing her despair. She slid down against the wall, water dripping onto her arms, and for the first time, she whispered the words she had fought so hard to avoid. "I can't do this alone." Her phone buzzed then. It was Victor checking in again. She almost ignored it. Her pride screamed at her to stop leaning on him. But his message was simple. "Just making sure you're okay. No need to answer." And something in her broke. She typed back with trembling fingers, "I'm not." He was at her door less than an hour later, bringing warm food, a plumber, and the kind of quiet reassurance no one had given her in months. That night, as she fell asleep, she realized she wasn't entirely alone anymore. But the scars of abandonment were still carved deep. Every ultrasound appointment she attended by herself reminded her of Andrew's betrayal. Every socialite whisper that she was washed up drove the knife deeper. The humiliation of watching Hila flaunt stolen happiness on Andrew's arm burned like acid. And yet, in that pit of despair, something fierce began to grow. A resolve sharper than steel. Emma decided that if the world wanted to see her broken, she would stand taller. If Andrew thought she would beg, she would make him regret underestimating her. Her darkest nights had stripped her bare, but they had also forged her. Like steel and fire, Emma Weston was being reshaped into something stronger, sharper, unstoppable. No one at the gala knew the depth of her suffering. They only saw the surface, a glowing woman with a powerful man at her side. But beneath that glow lay scars, and those scars were her armor. And soon, Andrew would learn that the woman he discarded was not broken. She was reborn. The ballroom had not recovered from Emma's entrance. Whispers swirled like a storm, cameras clicked with frantic urgency, and every pair of eyes flickered between Andrew Weston and the woman he had abandoned. The tension was electric, charged with the unspoken question, what will he do now? Andrew's chest heaved as he gripped the microphone. For a man who thrived on control, his composure was slipping fast. He scanned the room, saw the judgment in the eyes of investors, the smug delight in rivals, and worst of all, the quiet dignity radiating from Emma. That dignity burned him like acid. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andrew began, forcing a smirk that wavered at the edges, "I suppose you've all noticed an unexpected guest." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, but no one joined him. "This is my ex-wife," he continued, gesturing toward Emma with a dismissive wave. "A woman who, unfortunately, could not handle the pressures of success. Some people just aren't built for this world." Gasps rippled again, but this time sharper. Emma's hand instinctively pressed against her belly, her jaw tightening. Andrew's words weren't just meant to wound, they were designed to humiliate her publicly, to reduce her to a cautionary tale. He wasn't finished. His voice rose, desperate to reclaim dominance. "You see, while some cling to the past, others move forward. That's why I chose Hila. She represents the future, beauty, ambition, strength, not weakness and dependency." His eyes locked onto Emma's belly with cruel emphasis. "Dragging a child into this world without stability? That's reckless." The cruelty was brutal, a dagger aimed at her most vulnerable place. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others whispered in disapproval. Even Hila's smile faltered. But Andrew pressed on, convinced that tearing Emma down was his only way to stand tall again. And then Victor stepped forward. The billionaire didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence silenced the room as he took the microphone from Andrew with calm authority. Andrew's protest, "Hey, that's mine," was ignored, drowned in the hush that fell over the crowd. Victor's gaze swept the ballroom, steady and piercing. "Reckless?" he repeated, his voice smooth yet edged with steel. "I see a woman who carried a child alone after being discarded. I see strength where others only see convenience. And I see someone who deserves admiration, not ridicule." He turned slightly, his hand brushing Emma's arm, steadying her. "It takes no courage to flaunt a mistress. It takes courage to face the world when it tries to break you and still stand tall." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Heads nodded. Some clapped softly. Andrew's face flushed red, his jaw clenching as he tried to speak, but Victor wasn't finished. He leaned just enough toward Andrew, his voice dropping lower, intimate but deadly. "You called her weak. Yet she stands here with dignity while you scramble to justify your betrayal. Weakness isn't in her. Weakness is hiding behind someone else's beauty because you fear you have none of your own." The impact was devastating. The audience's sympathy shifted entirely. Emma wasn't the broken wife anymore. She was the woman wronged, standing beside a man whose words carried truth and authority. Andrew, once the host of the gala, looked like an intruder at his own celebration. Hila pulled her arm from his, eyes darting nervously at the guests whispering about her. Investors exchanged knowing looks. Phones buzzed as reporters typed headlines. "Victor Hale defends pregnant ex-wife against CEO's cruelty." Emma exhaled slowly, her spine straightening. She hadn't spoken a word, yet she had won, because sometimes silence paired with the right ally was louder than any speech. Andrew had tried to humiliate her. Instead, he had humiliated himself, and the night was far from over. The ballroom was already thick with tension. Emma's quiet strength and Victor's devastating defense had turned the tide of sympathy. Andrew Weston, once the host basking in admiration, now stood on stage sweating under the chandeliers, his confidence shattered. But the night hadn't even delivered its most brutal blow yet. It started with a vibration of phones, a ripple of notifications flashing across the room. At first, it was subtle, guests discreetly glancing at their screens, brows furrowing, lips parting. Then the whispers spread like wildfire. "Is this real?" Someone gasped near the champagne fountain. Another clutched her husband's sleeve. "Oh my God, it's about Andrew." Andrew noticed the shift immediately. The attention that had once been his lifeblood now turned toxic, eyes narrowing, murmurs rising. He tried to continue his speech, his voice faltering. As I was saying, Weston Financial is stronger than ever. But he was interrupted by the loud chime of a reporter's phone on the press balcony. The reporter's face lit up with a mixture of shock and glee. "Breaking news," he shouted before he could stop himself. "Andrew Weston under investigation for fraud and embezzlement." The room exploded. Guests gasped, reporters scrambled, and cameras turned on Andrew like predators circling wounded prey. The whispers sharpened into daggers. Embezzlement? Didn't he claim record profits last quarter? I knew those numbers didn't add up. Andrew's face drained of color. "That's ridiculous," he barked, his voice cracking. "It's lies. Competitors trying to smear me." But it was too late. Screens lit up with headlines. SEC launches probe into Weston Financial. Allegations of embezzlement surface. Emails and news alerts blasted across devices, complete with leaked documents. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, suspicious loans. The timing was merciless. Victor Hale didn't move, but his eyes locked on Andrew with quiet certainty. To him, this wasn't surprising. Powerful men always left trails, and arrogance made those trails impossible to hide forever. Yila Monroe, still clutching her diamond-studded clutch, felt her stomach drop. She glanced at Andrew, her smile frozen, her mind already calculating the damage. A model's career thrived on luxury brands and public approval. Association with a disgraced CEO? It was social suicide. She discreetly stepped an inch away from him, pretending to adjust her gown. Andrew saw it. His fiancée, the prize he had flaunted, was already retreating. Panic gripped him. He pounded the microphone, desperate. "None of this is true. Do you think I'd risk everything? I am Weston Financial. Without me, half of you wouldn't have your portfolios." But the audience wasn't listening. Investors slipped out to make frantic calls. Donors whispered about pull-in pledges. Photographers captured every twitch of his unraveling face. What was meant to be Andrew's crowning night had turned into the opening scene of his downfall. Emma stood silently at Victor's side, her expression calm. She hadn't orchestrated this. Fate had. But she couldn't deny the poetic justice. The man who had called her weak was now crumbling under the weight of his own corruption, exposed for the fraud he was. Victor leaned close to her, his voice a low murmur only she could hear. "You don't need revenge, Emma. The truth will always do the work for you." Her hand brushed her belly, and for the first time in months she felt a flicker of peace. Andrew was collapsing under the same spotlight he had once used to blind her. The gala had been meant to showcase his triumph. Instead, it had revealed his rot. And Emma, radiant and unbroken, was standing tall as the world finally saw the man Andrew Weston truly was. If the breaking news about Andrew's financial crimes had cracked the foundation of the gala, Yila Monroe's reaction was the hammer that shattered it completely. For a long moment, she stood frozen on Andrew's arm, her smile plastered on like porcelain, her eyes darting rapidly as the crowd devoured the scandal. Reporters shouted questions, investors whispered urgently into their phones, and the once glorious spotlight that had bathed Andrew in admiration now burned with accusation. And Yila, ever the opportunist, calculated her next move. She had fought too hard, climbed too far to let herself drown with him. Andrew had been useful. A stepping stone into elite circles, a ticket to front rows and glossy magazine features. But now, he was poison. The brands that courted her, the photographers who praised her, none would touch her if she stayed tethered to a man accused of embezzlement. Andrew felt her hand stiffen against his arm. He looked at her, desperate, his voice a hiss under the hum of chaos. "Don't just stand there, say something. They need to see we're united." Yila blinked, her lashes fluttering like wings over calculating eyes. Then, slowly, deliberately, she slipped her hand from his. The detachment was subtle, but to the crowd it screamed louder than any declaration. She was stepping away. The photographers caught it instantly. Flashbulbs ignited like fireworks as her diamond bracelet glinted in the light. Headlines were already being written. Model Fiancée distances herself from disgraced CEO. Andrew's face crumpled. "What are you doing?" he demanded, panic rising in his voice. Yila tilted her head, her lips curving into the faintest, cruelest smile. "Damage control," she whispered. She turned to the nearest camera, her expression softening into practiced vulnerability. "I had no idea," she said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "I never wanted to be caught in something dishonest." Her voice trembled, perfectly timed. "I thought he was different." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Guests leaned in, devouring every word. Yila, the glamorous fiancée, was now recasting herself as the victim. It was a performance honed over years in the modeling world, where survival meant rewriting the narrative before anyone else could. Andrew's rage boiled over. "You liar," he snapped, his voice cracking. "You knew everything. You wanted this life. Don't you dare act innocent now." The outburst only sealed his fate. Cameras zoomed in on his red face, his trembling hands, his fiancée recoiling in apparent fear. In a single moment, Andrew was no longer the powerful CEO betrayed by headlines. He was a man abandoned by the very woman he had flaunted as his victory prize. Yila stepped back, clutching her clutch like a shield. "I can't be part of this," she whispered dramatically, though her voice carried far enough for the microphones to catch. "I have my career, my integrity. I need to protect myself." The crowd was merciless. Whispers turned into laughter, shaking heads murmured condemnations. "Did you see that? She dropped him like a stone." Typical. He traded his wife for someone who'd trade him back even faster. Emma, watching from Victor's side, didn't smile. She didn't need to. The sight spoke for itself. Yila's betrayal was poetic justice. Andrew had thrown away loyalty for vanity, only to be discarded by vanity itself. Andrew's knees nearly buckled. He tried to call after her as Yila moved toward the exit, her heels clicking decisively against the marble. "Yila, don't walk away from me." But she didn't look back. The cameras followed her departure, capturing every angle, every step that widened the chasm between them. By the time she disappeared through the double doors, Andrew Weston was alone, truly, utterly alone, surrounded by wealth and power that no longer wanted him. And that loneliness, that public abandonment, cut deeper than any headline ever could. The chaos of the ballroom still echoed behind her, but Emma found herself pulled into the quieter corridors of the hotel by a sudden commotion. A voice, sharp and high-pitched, carried through the hall. "Yila Monroe." The model had slipped away from the main stage, her mask of practiced poise cracking under the pressure. She stood near a gilt-framed mirror, frantically adjusting her hair, her eyes darting like a trapped animal's. The sound of cameras faded here. This was the space between spectacle and reality. And into that silence stepped Emma. For the first time since the gala began, Emma and Yila faced each other without Andrew between them. It was just the betrayed wife and the woman who had flaunted herself as the upgrade. The air between them crackled with history. Neither had spoken aloud. Yila broke the silence first, her tone dripping venom. "You must be loving this, aren't you? Watching him fall apart, watching me, us, fall apart." Emma's voice was calm but firm. "No, I'm not enjoying it. I don't celebrate pain. But I won't deny the truth either. What you two did was cruel, and cruelty always circles back." Yila scoffed, tossing her hair. "Please, don't act like you're some saint. You couldn't keep him happy. That's why he came to me." Emma's eyes flickered, but her resolve didn't waver. "No, that's what he told you to make you feel special. But it's not about happiness. It's about greed. Andrew never wanted a partner. He wanted a mirror to reflect his ego. And you gave him that until the reflection cracked." Yila bristled, her claws coming out. "I'm still better than you. At least I know how to survive in his world. Look at you. You're pregnant, broke, abandoned. You think one night with Victor Hale changes that? You're nothing compared to me." Emma stepped closer, her voice low and cutting. "Nothing. I carried his child when he walked out the door. I faced eviction while you flaunted jewelry he bought with stolen money. I survived every sleepless night alone. And through it all, I never stopped protecting the life inside me. That's not nothing, Yila. That's strength you'll never understand." For a moment, Yila faltered. The words pierced through her bravado, striking something raw. She masked it quickly with a smirk, but her eyes betrayed the sting. Emma continued, her tone sharper now. "You thought you won because you took my husband, but what did you really win? A liar, a criminal, a man who traded loyalty for vanity. And when the fire came, he didn't protect you, he dragged you down with him." Yila's smirk faltered entirely. She gripped her clutch tighter, nails digging into the leather. "At least he chose me," she whispered bitterly. Emma shook her head. "No. He didn't choose you. He chose what you represented. A distraction, a shiny object. And when you stopped shining, he would have chosen someone else. That's not love. That's emptiness." The words hung heavy in the air. Hila looked away, her shoulders trembling, though whether with anger or shame was unclear. Emma's voice softened, though it carried the weight of finality. You can keep telling yourself you were the winner. But I don't need to win against you. I just need to rise above both of you. And tonight, I already have. Hila's lips parted, but no words came. For once, the model who thrived on attention was speechless. Emma turned and walked back toward the gala, her steps steady, her back straight. Behind her, Hila stared at her reflection in the mirror, the cracks in her carefully built persona finally too wide to ignore. It wasn't Emma who looked defeated in that hallway. It was Hila. Emma returned to the ballroom with her head held high after her confrontation with Hila, but inside, her body trembled. The adrenaline of the evening, the piercing words exchanged, and the crushing weight of public attention all churned together in her chest. She pressed her hand against her belly, whispering silently to her child, "Hold on. Please hold on." Victor noticed instantly. His eyes, sharp and calculating in business, softened the moment he saw her complexion pale. "Emma," he murmured, stepping closer, "you need to sit down." But Emma shook her head. "Not here. Not in front of them." She glanced at the cameras still flashing, the investors still whispering, Andrew pacing wildly on stage. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her weak. Then it happened. A sharp, stabbing pain shot across her abdomen. Her breath caught, her hand tightening on Victor's sleeve. Her knees buckled, and for one terrifying second, she felt the floor tilt beneath her. Gasps rippled through the nearest guests as Victor caught her just before she collapsed. "Emma." Victor's voice thundered, more commanding than any speech he had given that night. He lowered her gently into a chair, his arm cradling her protectively. Panic flared across the ballroom. Some rushed forward, others backed away, but every camera clicked furiously, capturing the moment. Andrew froze, his face twisted with something between shock and fear. For a split second, his mask of arrogance cracked. He looked at Emma, his abandoned wife, clutching her belly, fighting to breathe, and the reality struck him. She was carrying his child. His child. But instead of rushing to her side, Andrew faltered. His pride shackled him. Moving toward her now would look weak, hypocritical. So he stayed rooted, sweating under the glare of the chandeliers, while the world watched him do nothing. Victor barked orders with precision. "Call an ambulance now," he demanded. A staff member fumbled for their phone. Another rushed to fetch water. Victor kept his hand on Emma's shoulder, his voice steady, grounding her. "Stay with me, Emma. Focus on my voice. You're safe." Emma's breaths came in shallow gasps. Tears blurred her vision. "The baby," she whispered. Victor leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "The baby is strong. You're strong. Nothing is going to happen. Not while I'm here." Those words, calm and resolute, anchored her. She squeezed his hand, clinging to that lifeline. The crowd, once hungry for scandal, now watched with rapt silence. Many had tears in their eyes. A socialite whispered she shouldn't be under this stress. "Look at her. She's fighting for her child while he," she glanced bitterly at Andrew, "stands there doing nothing." When the paramedics arrived, Victor didn't hesitate. He scooped Emma into his arms, carrying her as though she weighed nothing, his expression carved in determination. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the image. The billionaire holding the pregnant ex-wife, rushing her to safety, while her ex-husband looked on, paralyzed by his own cowardice. Emma, drifting in and out of focus, felt the rhythm of Victor's heartbeat against her cheek. It was steady, unwavering. In that moment, she realized she wasn't alone anymore. The ambulance doors closed behind them, sirens wailing into the night. The gala had begun as Andrew's showcase, but it ended with Victor and Emma vanishing into the city lights, leaving behind a room full of people who would never forget the image of loyalty and betrayal laid bare. And as the sirens faded, so too did the last illusion of Andrew Weston's control. The sterile white walls of St. Mary's Hospital hummed with fluorescent light. Machines beeped softly, the rhythmic reassurance that both mother and child were still holding on. Emma lay propped up against a stack of pillows, her gown loose around her shoulders, her skin pale. The pain had dulled, but the exhaustion clung to her like a heavy blanket. She stared at the ceiling, the pattern of tiles blurring as memories invaded, memories she had tried to bury but could not silence. She remembered the night Andrew told her it was over. The way he stood by the window of their penthouse, city lights glittering behind him, and said flatly, "I can't do this anymore. You're dragging me down." She remembered begging, her hands pressed over her belly, whispering, "What about the baby?" And the way he had turned away without answering. The ache of that abandonment was sharper than any physical pain. Tears pricked her eyes, sliding hot down her temples. She pressed a hand over her belly, whispering to the child inside, "I'm still here. I won't leave you. Not like he did." Her voice cracked, breaking the silence of the hospital room. The door creaked open. Victor stepped in quietly, his tall frame softened by the dim light. He carried a paper bag in one hand and a small bouquet of lilies in the other. Without a word, he set them on the table beside her bed, his movements steady, almost ritualistic. "I thought you might want something real," he said, pulling out a container of homemade soup. "Hospital food isn't exactly known for comfort." Emma let out a shaky laugh, wiping at her tears. "You didn't have to." "I did," Victor replied simply. He pulled a chair close to her bed, sitting with the calm presence of someone who wasn't going anywhere. For a while, they sat in silence. Victor ladled soup into a cup, holding it out until Emma reluctantly took a sip. The warmth spread through her, soothing in a way medicine couldn't. "You don't have to stay," Emma murmured after a moment. "I know you're busy. You have a whole empire to run." Victor leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on hers. "Emma, there's nowhere else I need to be right now." The words landed heavier than she expected. She had heard grand declarations before. Andrew had been full of them. But Victor's tone was different. It wasn't boastful, it wasn't performative. It was quiet, grounded, and true. Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why are you doing all this for me, for us?" Victor hesitated, then spoke with honesty. "Because I see you, not as Andrew's ex-wife. Not as some story for the tabloids. I see a woman who was left behind, who's been carrying more than her share of pain, and still, you're here. Still fighting. That kind of strength deserves someone who won't walk away." Emma's lips trembled. No one had said words like that to her in so long. She turned her face, embarrassed by the tears slipping down her cheeks. Victor reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on her belly. His palm was warm, steady, grounding her. "You're not alone anymore, Emma," he said quietly. Her heart clenched, not with pain but with something unfamiliar. Hope. Outside the window, the city glittered, indifferent and cold. But inside that hospital room, for the first time in months, Emma felt safe. Not because her problems had vanished, but because someone finally chose to stay. And as Victor kept watch by her bedside, Emma drifted into sleep, her tears drying into the faintest smile. The days that followed Emma's hospital scare blurred into a quiet rhythm. Nurses checked her vitals, doctors urged rest, and Victor Hale remained a constant presence, calm, steady, unshakable. He wasn't just visiting, he was anchoring her. Each morning, he arrived before sunrise, bringing fresh flowers or books he thought she might enjoy. Each evening, he left only when she insisted, promising to return. Emma noticed the way he handled the smallest details, speaking with doctors, making sure her insurance paperwork was handled, even gently reminding her to eat when her appetite faltered. It wasn't grand gestures that touched her most. It was the simple, unwavering consistency. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the blinds, Emma sat up in bed, her hand resting on her rounded belly. Victor sat in the chair beside her, scanning a stack of emails on his tablet. He looked powerful even in stillness, his silver hair catching the light. "Why do you do it?" Emma asked suddenly. Victor looked up, brow furrowing. "Do what?" "All of this." She gestured weakly to the room, to him. "You could be anywhere else, with anyone else. You don't owe me anything." Victor set the tablet aside, his eyes, sharp yet gentle, locked on hers. "Emma, I've built an empire. Jets, contracts, influence. Yes, I have all of it. But what's the point if I can't use it to protect someone who actually deserves it? You're not a burden. You're a fighter. I'm just making sure you have the space to fight." Emma's throat tightened. For months she had believed she was nothing more than discarded baggage, left to rot in Andrew's shadow. But hearing Victor frame her not as weak, but as strong, it lit something inside her she thought had been extinguished. That night, after Victor left, Emma looked at her reflection in the hospital mirror. Her hair was messy, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. Yet for the first time she didn't see a victim, she saw a survivor. Memories of Andrew's words, "You're holding me back," echoed in her mind. She clenched her fists. He was wrong. She wasn't holding anyone back. She had carried herself through hell and was still standing. The next morning, Emma asked for her laptop. Victor raised a brow when he saw it on her lap. "Back to work already?" Emma nodded, determination sparking in her eyes. "I can't hide anymore. I need to start building something for myself, for my child. I spent too long building Andrew's empire. This time I'm building mine." Victor smiled faintly, admiration in his gaze. "That's the Emma I saw the first day we met." The hours that followed were filled with quiet focus. Emma made lists, drafted plans, reached out to contacts she hadn't spoken to in years. She wasn't sure what shape her future business would take. Consulting, design, maybe even a foundation for single mothers. But for the first time she felt in control. Each keystroke was an act of defiance, each note a promise. She would no longer be defined by Andrew's betrayal. That evening, as Victor helped her adjust her pillows, she looked at him with gratitude she couldn't fully voice. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost," she whispered. Victor tilted his head. "What's that?" Emma's lips curved faintly. "Myself." The room was quiet, but the shift inside her was seismic. She was no longer the woman cowering under Andrew's shadow. She was no longer merely surviving. She was preparing to rise. And when she did, the world, including Andrew Weston, would never forget it. The grand Weston mansion stood like a monument to arrogance. Glass walls, polished stone, fountains that sparkled under the moonlight. For years Andrew Weston had treated it as proof of his triumph, a fortress where he entertained investors and flaunted his wealth. Tonight, it became a stage for his downfall. Inside, Andrew paced furiously across the marble floors. The gala had ended in chaos, his fiancée gone, his reputation bleeding out across every news outlet. He had spent hours on the phone with lawyers, shouting until his throat burned, demanding they fix this. But even his most expensive attorneys couldn't silence the storm of evidence flooding the media. Offshore accounts, falsified reports, investor complaints. For the first time in years, Andrew felt fear claw at his chest. "Sir," his house manager stammered nervously from the doorway, "there are cars outside." Andrew froze. The sound of tires on gravel, heavy boots on stone, and then the unmistakable knock of authority. Andrew Weston, a commanding voice called through the door. "This is the SEC and the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest." The words shattered him. "No, no, no." Andrew muttered, backing away as the door burst open. Federal agents stormed in, suits and badges flashing, their presence undeniable. They moved with precision, their voices clipped and professional. "Hands where we can see them. Step aside." Andrew's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. I built this empire. I am Weston Financial." But the agents didn't flinch. One read aloud the charges: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. Each word was a nail in the coffin of his empire. Cameras outside captured every moment, news vans parked at the gates, their lights cutting through the night like judgment itself. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the property, whispering, pointing. Some recorded videos on their phones. The man who once hosted glittering parties now stood in his own living room, wrists cuffed in steel. Andrew's arrogance cracked into desperation. "Wait, I can explain. It's a misunderstanding." But no one listened. The agents led him past the grand staircase, past the portraits he had commissioned of himself and Ela, past the imported chandeliers he once boasted about. Now every symbol of wealth mocked him. Flashes exploded the moment he stepped outside. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward. "Andrew, did you embezzle company funds? What about your investors? Is it true you left your pregnant wife with nothing?" That last question hit like a blow. Andrew's head jerked up, his face twisting. He had thought discarding Emma was a private act, something buried under his charm and PR. Now the world knew and despised him for it. The agents shoved him into the back of a black SUV, his wrists chained, his empire collapsing around him. Inside the mansion, silence fell. The fountains still trickled, the lights still glowed, but the house felt hollow, stripped of its illusion of power. Across the city, Emma watched the news from her hospital room. The broadcast showed Andrew being pushed into the SUV, reporters swarming like vultures. She stared for a long moment, her hand resting on her belly. Victor, seated beside her, glanced at the screen, then at her. "Justice," he said simply. Emma nodded slowly. It wasn't triumph she felt, but closure. The man who had abandoned her, mocked her, tried to destroy her, was now destroyed by his own greed. The world finally saw him for what he truly was. And Emma, once the woman left behind, had already begun writing her new story. While Andrew Weston was dragged from his mansion in handcuffs, Hila Monroe faced her own reckoning. Not in a courtroom, but in the ruthless world of fashion and public opinion. The morning after the gala, her phone exploded with notifications. At first, she thought it might be sympathy messages. Perhaps, if she played the role of the deceived fiancée, she could salvage her image. But when she opened the headlines, her blood ran cold. Model Hila Monroe linked to disgraced CEO's scandal. The other woman, Hila Monroe's role in the Weston collapse. Brands cut ties with Hila Monroe amid backlash. One by one, her contracts evaporated. A luxury cosmetics brand released a statement within hours. "We do not tolerate associations with unethical behavior. Effective immediately, we are severing all ties with Ms. Monroe." The jewelry company followed suit. By noon, 3 fashion houses had canceled upcoming campaigns. The internet was merciless. Social media buzzed with clips from the gala. Emma entering with Victor, Hila slipping her hand from Andrew's arm, Andrew shouting in desperation. But the most damning footage was the hallway confrontation, leaked by a hotel employee who had overheard everything. Millions watched as Emma calmly dismantled Hila with words that cut deeper than diamonds. "She thought she won because she took my husband," Emma's voice echoed in the viral clip. But what did she really win? A liar. A criminal. The comment section was brutal. She destroyed another woman's marriage for this? Pathetic. Emma's grace versus Hila's arrogance, night and day. Imagine being dumped by your sugar daddy and cancelled in one night. Hila scrolled until her vision blurred, tears stinging her eyes. She hurled her phone across the room, shattering it against the wall. But the noise didn't drown out the truth. The world had turned on her. For years, she had built her career on curated perfection. Designer gowns, red carpets, flawless smiles. Now, the same cameras that once adored her followed her every stumble. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment, shouting cruel questions. "Were you Andrew's accomplice? Did you know about the fraud? How does it feel to be the mistress who lost everything?" She tried to fight back. She called her agent, demanding damage control. But his voice was cold. "Hila, you're toxic right now. No brand wants your face attached to theirs. I suggest you lay low." Lay low. 2 words that felt like a death sentence. For someone who lived on attention, invisibility was worse than poverty. As days passed, her friends stopped answering calls. Invitations dried up. The glossy magazine covers she dreamed of were replaced with tabloid spreads mocking her fall. One headline screamed, "From catwalk to cautionary tale." At night, Hila sat in her darkened apartment, the silence deafening. She poured herself expensive wine she could no longer afford. Staring at old photographs of herself on runways, draped in jewels, standing beside Andrew at glittering parties, she had thought she was untouchable. She had thought beauty was enough. But beauty, she realized too late, was from without loyalty, without respect. It was nothing. The cruelest twist, she had traded everything, her integrity, her reputation, her future, for Andrew Weston. And now he was gone, locked behind bars, leaving her with nothing but the ashes of borrowed glory. The world had moved on, already celebrating Emma as a symbol of resilience. Hila, once a queen of flashbulbs, was now a ghost, remembered only as a lesson in betrayal and downfall. And she hated Emma most of all, not because Emma destroyed her, but because Emma survived. The hospital room was dim, the lights lowered to a soft glow, the air filled with the quiet hum of machines. Outside, the city pulsed with noise and chaos, but in this room, time slowed to the rhythm of Emma's labored breaths. She gripped the rails of the hospital bed, sweat beading across her forehead, her face pale yet determined. Nurses bustled around her, voices calm but firm. "You're almost there, Emma. Just one more push." Victor stood at her side, his large hand wrapped around hers. She squeezed with every ounce of strength she had left, her nails digging into his skin. He didn't flinch. He only leaned closer, his voice steady, grounding her through the storm. "You can do this," he whispered, his forehead nearly touching hers. "You've already survived worse. This is where your fight turns into something beautiful." Tears welled in Emma's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she was strong enough, but the pain was searing, the exhaustion overwhelming. "I can't," she gasped, shaking her head. "Yes, you can," Victor insisted, his tone unyielding but filled with warmth. "Look at me, Emma. You've walked through fire and didn't break. This is your moment. This is your victory." The words lit something inside her, a final spark of determination. With a cry that echoed every heartbreak, every betrayal, every silent night she had endured, Emma pushed. The room seemed to pause, and then suddenly the air was pierced by a sharp, miraculous sound. A baby's cry. Emma collapsed back against the pillows, tears flowing freely now, not of pain, but of relief, of joy, of release. The nurse held up the tiny, wriggling bundle, swaddled in white, its face scrunched and pink. "Congratulations," the nurse said softly. "It's a girl." Emma's breath caught. A girl. Her daughter. The baby was placed gently into her arms, and the moment their skin touched, Emma's world shifted. All the pain, the humiliation, the loneliness of the past months dissolved into the background. Her daughter's tiny fingers curled instinctively around hers, and Emma let out a sob so raw it shook her chest. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's just us now, you and me, and I promise, I'll never let you go." Victor stood above them, his eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. He reached out, brushing a gentle finger over the baby's head. "She's perfect," he said, his voice husky, "just like her mother." Emma looked up at him through tears. In his eyes she didn't see pity or obligation. She saw pride, respect, maybe even love. The nurse moved quietly, adjusting blankets, checking vitals, but the room felt cocooned, sacred. Emma kissed her daughter's forehead, inhaling the sweet, new scent of life. The weight of everything she had lost was still there, but now it was balanced by everything she had gained. For months, Andrew's betrayal had defined her. Now, holding her child, Emma knew she was defined by something else entirely: resilience, love, and the strength to begin again. Victor squeezed her shoulder gently. "She'll never have to doubt she's wanted. Not as long as you're her mother." Emma smiled through her tears, her voice soft but steady. "Not as long as we're here for her." The baby let out another cry, softer this time, as though agreeing. Emma laughed weakly, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead. Outside the hospital, reporters still clamored for updates about Andrew Weston's scandal, about Ela Monroe's collapse. But in this room, none of that mattered. Here there was only a mother, her child, and the man who had chosen to stand beside them. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt not broken, not abandoned. She felt whole. 2 months after the hospital, Emma Weston stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back. Her hair, once unkempt from sleepless nights and tears, now fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Her posture was straight, her eyes sharper, clearer. Gone was the timid, abandoned wife who whispered apologies into the darkness. In her place stood a woman reborn, mother, survivor, fighter. Motherhood had changed her, yes, but not in the way Andrew once feared. Rather than anchor her, her daughter had become her wings. Each sleepless night, rocking the tiny infant, each cry soothed, each lullaby hummed, had strengthened her resolve. Emma realized she wasn't just living for herself anymore. She was building a future for both of them. With Victor's quiet guidance, she began piecing together her next chapter. He never hovered, never dictated. Instead, he opened doors and let her choose which ones to walk through. He introduced her to contacts in philanthropy, in business, in media. "You have a voice people need to hear," he told her one evening as they walked through his private hangar, the roar of jets echoing around them. "Don't hide it anymore." Emma took his words to heart. She founded a nonprofit within weeks, the Phoenix Foundation, dedicated to supporting single mothers abandoned by their partners. It wasn't just charity, it was her story, transformed into a mission. She poured her pain into purpose, speaking publicly about resilience, about survival, about the strength women carry even when the world tries to silence them. The media, once obsessed with Andrew's scandal, now found a new narrative. Headlines shifted. From betrayal to empowerment, Emma Weston's rise. Interviews followed. Magazines once filled with Ela's glossy photos now featured Emma holding her daughter, radiant and strong. She didn't flaunt wealth, didn't chase glamour. Instead, she embodied authenticity, and people responded with admiration. Her first major public appearance came at a fundraising gala, ironically hosted at the same hotel where Andrew's empire had collapsed. This time, Emma didn't enter as a trembling woman clinging to survival. She entered as a force. Her gown was elegant but commanding, a deep emerald that highlighted her strength. She carried her daughter in her arms as she stepped onto the stage, Victor by her side, not overshadowing her but standing proudly as her ally. The room, filled with business leaders and politicians, rose to its feet in applause. Emma's speech was short but powerful. 2 months ago I stood in this very ballroom, broken, judged, humiliated. But tonight I stand as proof that betrayal is not the end. It's the beginning. Every woman who has been told she is less than, every mother who has been left behind, you are not weak. You are fire, and fire rises. The standing ovation shook the chandeliers. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of Emma cradling her child, smiling through strength. Somewhere far away, Andrew watched the coverage from a prison television, bitterness gnawing at him. Ela, fading into obscurity, scrolled angrily through articles celebrating the woman she once mocked. But neither of them mattered anymore. Emma no longer needed revenge. Her existence, thriving, dignified, unstoppable, was revenge enough. Victor leaned close as the applause continued. "You realize you've just changed lives tonight," he murmured. Emma looked down at her daughter, then back at the crowd. "No," she said softly. "She changed mine. I'm just passing it on." And in that moment, Emma Weston, once discarded, now stood not just as a survivor, but as a symbol of hope. The night of the Phoenix Foundation's official launch became the closing chapter of Emma's long, painful story, and the first page of her new one. The ballroom was filled with applause, her speech still echoing in the hearts of everyone present. Emma stood center stage, her daughter nestled safely in her arms, Victor at her side. Cameras flashed not out of scandal, but admiration. For the first time in her life, Emma wasn't being pitied or whispered about, she was being celebrated. But while she rose, Andrew and Ela sank deeper into their own shadows. From a federal prison cell, Andrew watched the evening news. The tiny TV bolted to the wall showed Emma's glowing face, headlines praising her resilience. Around him, fellow inmates jeered. "That your wife?" one man mocked. "She looks a hell of a lot better without you." Andrew's jaw tightened, humiliation burning hotter than any court verdict. He had traded loyalty for vanity, family for greed, and ended with nothing but a number on an orange jumpsuit. Ela's fall was just as brutal. Blacklisted from fashion weeks, abandoned by sponsors, and hounded by paparazzi, she drifted from city to city chasing scraps of relevance. Once the darling of luxury campaigns, she was now a cautionary tale splashed across tabloids. Her social media following, once her kingdom, turned against her. Every post was flooded with comments: homewrecker, gold digger, forgotten already. She had wanted the world to envy her. Now the world mocked her. But Emma didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Their downfall was their own doing. She focused instead on the stage before her, on the hundreds of women who had come to hear her speak, on the donors writing checks to support abandoned mothers who needed hope. As the gala wound down, a journalist approached her gently. "Emma, if you could send one message to women who are where you were a year ago, scared, abandoned, broken, what would you tell them?" Emma looked into the camera, her daughter's tiny fingers curled around hers. Her voice was steady, but thick with emotion. "I would tell them this: you are not defined by the people who betray you. You are not broken because someone tried to discard you. You are stronger than you know. And the moment you stop believing the lies told about you is the moment you begin to rise." She paused, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I thought I lost everything, but in truth, I was being given a chance to build something better. And tonight, holding my daughter, I can tell you, it's possible. Healing is possible. Happiness is possible. You just have to believe you deserve it." The room erupted in applause, some guests openly weeping. Victor slipped his arm around her shoulders, not to overshadow her, but to share in the moment. His presence was steady, protective, but the spotlight was hers alone. Later that night, as Emma laid her daughter in the crib for the first time in her new home, a home filled with love, not lies, she stood by the window, watching the city lights. The same skyline that once made her feel small now felt like a canvas for possibility. Andrew and Ela were memories, footnotes in a story that belonged to her no longer. The only truth that mattered now was the sleeping child in the crib, the strength she had discovered, and the life she was building brick by brick. Emma Weston had been betrayed, humiliated, discarded, but she had risen. And in rising, she had given every woman watching her story a reason to believe that they could too. And so the curtain fell, not on tragedy, but on triumph. So that's how our story ends. My wonderful friends, you're still here with me, aren't you? If you've stayed until now, it means something in this story has touched your heart in its own way. And maybe, just maybe, it's because deep down we all know what it feels like to be broken, betrayed, and then slowly rebuilt stronger than before. The Stoics taught us that what truly matters is not what happens to us, but how we respond. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Emma's journey showed us exactly that. Pain, abandonment, humiliation. Yet she rose, and in her rising, she found power and peace. Maybe you're going through something right now. Maybe life has knocked you down. Remember this: suffering can be a forge, and you can come out of the fire stronger, brighter, unstoppable. If this story touched you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who might need hope, and don't forget to subscribe. Stay with us, because together we'll keep finding stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of our own strength.